Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We now move to item 5 on our agenda, and that's the Q4 performance report for 22-23. I will now ask Alex Rawlin or Kate, to present the report. Welcome, Kate and Alex.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Kate Pask for the recording, and I'm a Corporate Improvement Officer. This report provides an overview of the Council's performance against the corporate plan objectives in Q4 of 22-23, which is the final year-end outturn position. This is the final year of the corporate plan 2018-2023. The plan defined 31 commitments to deliver the 3 wellbeing objectives for 22-23, with 36 linked performance indicators to measure this progress. Directorate plans for 22-23 defined additional service actions for these commitments, along with other key indicators which would be monitored quarterly at corporate performance assessment. Table 1 in the report shows the overall position for the commitments at year end. The status awarded for each commitment will have been judged taking into account the service actions and performance indicators which underpin them. In addition to the usual format of this report, this has also been broken down in Table 2 by wellbeing objective. Table 3 then provides a summary outturn position for the 36 corporate plan indicators, 32 of which can be compared against their target and have a RIG status. Table 4 then breaks these down further into wellbeing objective. There is trend data available for 29 of the corporate plan indicators, where it was possible to analyse trend. This is included below. Table 5 then incorporates the additional performance indicators identified as being part of the CPA process in the 4 directorate business plans, and again sets them out, the ones that have a RAG status, and Table 6 again breaks them down by wellbeing objective. Appended to the report were the 4 directorate-specific performance dashboards. These were produced and reviewed for Q4 corporate performance assessment, which was held in June. These give far greater detail of the work undertaken within the year, along with additional information on staffing, budget, risks, impact of budget reductions, and current regulator recommendations, all which help to provide a fuller picture of the current challenges within the directorates. An additional paper was prepared and circulated on Friday, which focuses specifically on commitments and performance indicators, which are red and amber. The content is the same as that provided in the individual dashboards, but breaks it down again by wellbeing objective.
Great. Thank you very much, Kate, for that brief summary. I think you needed a further maths degree, though, to go through this comprehensive set of data. And just bearing in mind what we said on July the 3rd, and it's contained on page 191 of our document pack, that perhaps in future for us as lay members, we could receive perhaps more of an executive summary to ensure that we can fully understand all of the consequences. And I know that a number of members struggled perhaps with understanding the difference between corporate commitments and indicators. So I think Councillor Amanda Williams, Councillor Simon Griffiths and Councillor Heidi Bennett wanted to come in with some general comments before we delve into the different directorates. So who would like to go first? Councillor Griffiths, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's a general point I wanted to make around the, I'm just looking at page 39, where we've got 25% of Q4 performance saying there's targets missed by 10% or more. And I think my concern here is that, again, we need to take some stronger action for those projects which are missing their targets by so much. And so I think there are a number of different approaches we could use for this, but generally it's around bringing a broader viewpoint on some of those projects that may be in trouble outside the normal people that might look at them. So rather than relying on the existing managers who are clearly struggling to meet those targets, whether there could be something which is almost like an external review. Some companies might call it a red team, or it might be a star chamber. It might be all sorts of different approaches. And very often it's taken from different directorates to give a broader viewpoint of those services which are missing the the targets and over 10% over miss. So I think what I'm really suggesting here is that we look for a systematic way across the whole organisation of identifying those areas which are most red, if you like, and then bringing in the experts at problem fixing that we have within the council to bear on those most troublesome areas. So I think that's a suggestion really about the approach of what we can do now that we have this great information in front of us.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Who would like to take that one, Alex?
I think we'll just take that into account as we go through the next 6 months, planning how we're going to report performance in the future. As I understand it, there did used to be challenge meetings at Bridgend Council, so I think we'll look at whether something like that might be a sensible approach for the future.
Councillor Griffiths, are you content with that reply?
Yeah, thanks very much. If that's already been built into our plans, I think this is now that we have this information, it gives us the opportunity to be able to do this. And so thank you for doing it. And yeah, those are great next steps, Alex. So we'll absolute support in doing those.
Thank you very much, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just noting that Alex and the team are reviewing how we report performance in the future, but another overall comment or observation really, and that is that the performance dashboards reference performance versus targets and are all indicators as an initial snapshot. But the comments and the narrative and the direction of travel tracker is compared against previous year's performance rather than target set in annual target set, it seems. And sometimes it's not even referenced in the commentary. So is there a way of ensuring consistency in the commentary? Otherwise the annual targets seem to get lost or seem pointless because we're actually only reporting on trends based on previous year's performance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Kate?
The trend data is a relatively new thing that we've sort of added as an extra dimension to the reports, which allowed us to bring in that sort of additional layer of we've improved or we've fallen, but not by quite as much as you know. It gave an extra level of detail to give you the sort of yellow status then, rather than just the red, green and amber. We ask for depending on the type of indicator, the trend will be based either on the last performance of that PI or the previous year, just because that's the only thing that we've got to compare it with, whereas the red, green and amber is purely based on the target, sometimes for the quarter within the year, but at year end for this one, it'll be based on the annual target. So that both things need to be treated sort of separately, and they are in terms of if a PI is green but it is showing a fall in performance, that's why we've got that yellow status now, so that there still is required commentary from the directorate. Even if they are meeting the target, they still need to provide adequate commentary if it shows a fall in performance overall.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bennett?
Thanks. Yeah, I guess we're not seeing that consistency in the commentary though. Sometimes the reference is in relation to previous year's performance and there is no reference to the annual target that has been set. So if we're going to do that, the commentary should perhaps have, as it does in social services actually, it has a comment on target setting, but maybe it should be referencing how we are doing against our annual target as well as how we have performed against the previous year.
Yeah, we can certainly add that in, and maybe it's something we need to look at in terms of requiring more commentary, even if indicators are on targets, but we still would like some context of how they are performing anyway. But it's definitely something we can look at in terms of when we review this now, ready for Q2.
Great, thank you, Kate, for those assurances. Okay, Councillor Amanda Williams.
Thanks very much. Mine with regards to Table 1 and Table 2 compared to Table 3 and Table 4. In Table 1 and 2, it's got 0 for red. Now, I know that this is the overall position on commitments and the position for each of the wellbeing objectives, but when you go to table 3 and 4, there's a lot of red in those. And having been on COSC now for last year and the year before, I've seen that some of these haven't progressed and we still haven't achieved targets. So I wondered why there are no reds in there, because this is suggesting that we're confident that we should see improvements in all areas and that we should see there's no significant issues in achieving the targets. But some of these targets haven't been met this year or last year. So I just wanted some clarity on that, please.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. And furthermore to that, it's rather alarming, I guess, that we have 88.9% within wellbeing objective 2 in table 2 in amber on helping people and communities to be more healthy and resilient. So perhaps you can explore that in more detail, please, Kate.
Thank you. The difference between the two tables is the difference between the commitments themselves are, that's something where the director and the managers have come to a view on how that commitment is done, taking into account all of the evidence of the work sitting underneath it. So that'll be the commitment itself, but also the service actions and the indicators that are underpinning it. Whereas in the other table, there is just the commitments where there are just the performance indicators where there are red ones. That's purely a numerical decision. If one of the indicators is more than 10% outside of target, it will be red. But if you understand, if under that commitment there were 6 indicators and 5 of them were green and all of the service actions were green, even though there is that red indicator, it might not lead to the overall decision on that commitment being that it is red. It would probably just maybe be an amber with a commentary to explain that.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Councillor Williams, content?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Granville?
Thank you, Chair. I often speak about this, but I am really concerned about sickness absence within the authority. I'm reading this and I'm alarmed, really alarmed. Can we perhaps have you got in here about the Communities Directorate, with the exception of that, but could we have a breakdown perhaps of not of each directorate, of sickness level in each directorate? Because it's alarming to read that it's gone up to 13.20 days to this year to 12.36 days last in the same period, and it's going up to 7.3 and a quarter for 22-23. And I think, Chair, I have spoke about this. I think really now, as an authority, we need to get a grips with it. And perhaps we need to look at perhaps a Human Resources Committee being set up to look at it. Thank you, Chair.
I know Councillor Williams mentioned a similar matter as you, Councillor Granville, and also Councillor Hughes mentioned issues regarding musculoskeletal sickness within the Communities Directorate. But I know Councillor Gebby would like to come in first of all to address some of your points.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for your question, Councillor. What I would say is that in each individual dashboard, in each individual directorate, there are breakdowns of sickness in the dashboards. So I'm not sure how much further information you'd want. So if you could tell me, I'll get it to you, but I'm not sure how much more you want.
Yeah, in the dashboards, there is a breakdown of sickness level by directorate and what kind of sickness it is, as far as I can gather. But if there is any more information you'd like, I'm sure Alex, Kate, or any member of the team will be able to assist Councillor Granville. Councillor Williams, please.
Thanks very much. I thought I'd raise my question now on sickness. In the dashboards, you look at all except for education, and there seems to be a high level of work-related stress that is increased. So I wondered what we're doing to try and reduce this, and have we seen anything that's made us concerned? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Who would like to take that? Councillor David?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And it's obviously of concern that we've seen that increase. There is a lot of work that has been undertaken centrally by human resources around improving the well-being of staff, and I'm sure the chief executive can provide greater detail on that. We're hoping to see long-term benefits from that additional work, and we're also working very closely with trade union colleagues as well about how we can try and achieve those long-term improvements. And the other point I would also like to make is that what we're certainly seeing, and I've had some feedback on this, is that the pressures that people are facing in life in general will have an impact on how they feel about work as well. So the cost of living crisis and just those pressures in general, we know are having a wider impact on the workforce, and unfortunately, so that can quite often mean that workers will are more likely to suffer from, for example, work-related stress because of their own personal circumstances. But I'm sure the chief executive can come in. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, it's often the case that it's non-work related, isn't it, which spills over into the workplace. But I'll bring in now Mark, and then followed by Kelly Watson. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of things to add, really. We've invested quite heavily in our offer of wellbeing support for staff, certainly since the pandemic and post-pandemic, including now having a full... including now having a full-time officer, as well as a range of package of supports and assistance, including, for example, from Care First, our current provider. We are probably about to change provider, actually, in that sense. But the other thing that probably, to be fair, members won't be aware of is that we are currently in the process of consulting on a new, I think we're actually calling the attendance policy rather than the absence policy, because the focus is very, very different. It's about how do we keep people in work, how are we more flexible and agile, and provide support at an earlier stage, because I think the evidence is that it's far, far harder to get people back in work once they've gone off, rather than perhaps being more flexible than historically we've been able to by keeping them in work to some extent in the first place. And there's an HR responsibility in that, but there's also a managerial responsibility, because we're asking people to effectively manage absence in the way they would any other part of performance within their directorate. The other point that was made, what we're also finding is that it's actually quite difficult in most cases to differentiate, which I think the point the leader was making, between stress, anxiety and depression in work and at home. It's often both. It isn't as binary as perhaps that. And I think we need to recognise, therefore, that some of the things that are being presented to us are also things potentially caused by circumstances in their own personal life, or cost of living crisis, or whatever it might be. So I think, unfortunately, it's not always easy to separate those two things in perhaps the way that would be easier for us to then deal with it. But I just want to reassure members that it remains a very significant area of focus. That new policy will hopefully be presented soon, and of course it remains something that we as Councillor Granville suggested, it remains something that we're focused very heavily on. But I think the other last comment I'd make is that anecdotally, a lot of the feedback I get from managers is that, of course, the vacancies within our services means that those that remain in work often have increased burdens, increased workload, and we probably also need to monitor that very, very carefully as well, because what we're actually asking people to do is potentially take on more work than they ordinarily would have to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that contribution. Kelly's lowered her hand now, so I'll bring in Councillor Gebby.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's also worth noting National Health Service waiting lists, because any of our staff waiting for anything, whether it's musculoskeletal, mental health, we know that currently we're being told that there's at least a 2-year waiting list. I am advised by the lived experience of those residents out there trying to access services, some of the waiting lists are now in excess of 5 years. And so when you consider any staff member trying to support themselves to stay in work, as an I want to say as an old trade unionist, as a trade unionist, I would always support any member of staff who needed support. But I'm very conscious that our policies will dictate to us, as soon as we go through this process, actually, if a member of staff hasn't, that we need to be really clear about why there is a delay and why there is a delay in getting them back to work. And I think it's also of note is that if people think out there that 6 months of your pay is going to support you for 5 years because you then go on to zero pay, that's not going to do anything. So we need to think about this as a holistic approach. It's not just here as our staff and what we can do for them. It's about how our supporting health services can help them as well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks for that important contribution, Councillor Gebby. And I know Councillor Hughes wanted to raise a point regarding musculoskeletal sickness within the Communities Directorate as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the Deputy Leader really summed it up well, didn't she, about the fact that NHS waiting lists are so great, and you know, our employees, we got a figure of 28.61% in communities, because you would expect that incidence to be greatest in situations like back and neck injuries to occur there. I just wonder if there's anything that we can do as a council to try to help these people along who are faced with long waiting lists, and perhaps to reflect on the experience of organisations like the South Wales Fire and Rescue Service, who have a occupational therapist in post who are able to assist in certain situations. I appreciate all the preventative work that goes in as well, and the support that's given in other areas, including well-being and mental health. But in terms specifically of this category, I just wonder what we could possibly do to improve the situation for those who are waiting for a very long time for treatment. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Who would like to take that? Councillor Gebby?
I can take that, and we can look at anything we like as members, is what I want to say. However, considering the budget discussions that we're having here today, I'm not sure that it's something that I would want to recommend. I think as we have brilliant occupational health here, so I think that's worth noting. I think the other thing that I would say is 10 years ago, working in local government, if you needed physio that you couldn't get on the NHS, we would have paid for you. We're not in the same position anymore. And also, we haven't got the physios out there. So, you know, it's more than just the one thing. There's actually a combination of factors. There's also the cost. But realistically, our NHS is supposed to be free at the point of use for anybody that needs it. And whilst I appreciate that Westminster keep chucking money into our health service, we actually need money in our preventative services. So I can get on my soapbox about this again, but it's something that I've well rehearsed. You've all heard me say it before. And I'm not sure that there's, you know, I'd be really conscious about how much that would cost us if we made that offer just as a whole to all our staff.
Thanks, Councillor Gebby. Mark? Okay, no worries. Janine, you'd like to come in on your directorate?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you for that. Just to say that the MSD issue in communities is an improving picture, actually. Not that 28% is good, of course, it absolutely isn't, but it used to be much higher. We've introduced more training, we're using more devices, such as handheld devices to stop issues of vibration, etc., etc. So we are tightening up on a lot of that. What I would say as well is we have a significant manual workforce, of course, in communities that go out and do everything for us, and sometimes an older demographic in our workforce. So you would expect, unfortunately, these are people who work very hard in all weathers. We do sometimes get injuries and sickness levels, but what I would say is the trend is reducing in that area because of a significant amount of work that we're doing. I'm very aware of it as well. So just for information.
Great, thank you, Janine. That's encouraging. Does anyone else have any other questions on the cover report? That's pages 37 to 43. On that basis, we move to Appendix A, pages 45 to 67, and that's the Social Services and Wellbeing Performance Year End. I know that Councillor Bennett has questions on this report. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, on page 45, I believe, it notes the social services operational pressures in relation to levels of young people on the child protection register and also care experienced children. How do our figures compare to other areas? And do we have an understanding of why these figures are so high in Bridgend, please?
Thank you. Jackie?
Okay, thank you for the question. So in terms of these figures, this is quite a volatile area of our performance. I think our figures from the year-end ones that are quoted in here have gone slightly down since the end of the year, really. So there is a positive reduction, I suppose, in that population. I think that there are quite a number of factors that we've been doing as a directorate in terms of bringing those numbers down. I think the last figures that I've seen were that we were the 6th highest in Wales, I think, in terms of the data. We are profiling, obviously, our population, and we have got a number of 16-year-olds in the system that will turn 18 in the next couple of years, so those figures will go down in terms of that. We've got significant scrutiny on every individual, on every child in there, and we are working with our legal colleagues and some of our social workers in terms of looking at different ways of us managing that situation, really. So, but we have been generally in Bridgend have high numbers in this area. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor Bennett, are you happy with that response?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, I mean, Councillor Gebbie mentioned things like signs of safety training. I was wondering if that was having an impact, for example, in identifying some vulnerable young people, or indeed our educational welfare team, or you know, some of the things that we've put in place in terms of referral mechanisms.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Gebbie?
So thank you for the question, Councillor Bennett. What I would say is in our CIW improvement check, they noted good practice. And what that means is some of it was variable because signs of safety have only just been implemented. Not all staff are trained in it. We are getting through a cohort, however, because there's an awful lot of staff in social services. We are seeing a reduction, and we're seeing a reduction in the level of need. And that's because we're working from a different position. You also mentioned about across Wales. Even in our own regional partnership board area, we used to be the highest in child protection figures. We're actually the lowest now, so Merthyr and RCT have overtaken us. I want to say that I'm really pleased about that, but I'm not. The fact that we've got this many children coming in under child protection procedures is quite alarming, really, if I'm honest. But we also know historically that the more pressures that we see on families financially, the more pressures we are going to see on our well-being and our social services department. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader. Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I've got the mic, can I just say on page 48, where the report references consultation, engagement, involvement, that I'd like to congratulate the staff team on the level of consultation and engagement, because it really does demonstrate our commitment to taking into consideration service user perspective and young voice. So that was really good to read. I know we focus on what's missing, but actually that's really positive. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Bennett, and we'll ensure that the team are made aware of that, and that can be noted. So we'll move now to Councillor Simon Griffiths.
So I had a question. Are we on page 55 I was referring to? I think we're there. Is that okay?
If you want to raise your point, is it page 53 on agency costs? Was that correct?
It was. That's right. Yeah. So my question here is that agency costs are troublesome right across many directorates, and I wondered whether we had a view of the overall cost to the authority of agency cost compared to the equivalent staff being provided as employees. So it's really about getting that top level view, and maybe even being able to use that back into Welsh Government or other people to explain what clear costs that we are having because we are unable to recruit.
Okay, who would like to take that question? Agency costs. Kelly, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. We do monitor agency cost, and we can break it down into service areas. We can certainly get that data to you, and I know social services in particular are using that data in their communication with Welsh Government. But we can certainly get that broken down for you, Councillor Griffiths.
Many thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Kelly. We'll ensure that's recorded in our minutes. Now we'll move to, I believe, Councillor Griffiths, you had a question on the percentage of care leavers, page 61, is that correct?
That's right, yes. So there's a comment on page 63 on the percentage of care leavers that says there's been an impact on the number of young people engaging in education, employment and or training. I don't understand if the impact is positive or negative. And I'm also concerned that obviously we're already in the red, and the arrow is also pointing down, which means that it's getting worse. So what I'd really like to understand is, first is, what is the impact of the basic income pilot? And then secondly, is this going to continue to get worse?
Thank you very much, Councillor Griffiths. Who would like to take that one? Jackie?
Okay, so the basic income support is a national programme of work that's being run by Welsh Government, and it's a pilot scheme, as it says in there, in terms of care leavers, and does exactly what it says and ensures that there's a basic income level. What we've experienced, and we're just starting to see a trend really, is that young people that are in receipt of that are eligible for that and in receipt of that are actually not engaging in education, employment and other training, as opposed to those that don't get that income support. So currently 58.2% of people that are in receipt of the basic income pilot are engaging in education, and those that are not in receipt of it, 81.8% are engaging in education. So it seems a negative impact on the face value of it. But before we can draw any conclusions that we would report, really, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive across that. I know at a national level, we had some feedback across Wales, and there were quite a few consequences of the scheme that were noted, and they're going to do some further work at a national level as well as us doing it targeted at an individual level.
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor David?
Thanks, Chair. Cardiff University being commissioned by Welsh Government to undertake evaluation of the pilot, and of course one of the areas that they will be investigating is any unintended consequences of the pilot in terms of participation in education and training, because that is what we want for our care leavers to be on a route and involved in either employment or education or training. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Griffiths, you content?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to hear that we've got some academic rigour coming to this. This trial is obviously of national and potentially global importance, because there aren't many proper studies of universal income around the world. So I'm very pleased that we're doing it. And obviously it's concerning that it's not necessarily having the impact that we would hope it would have. But it'll be very interesting to see what the results of the academic research is. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Bennett, I'm conscious of the fact that I might have missed you and you wanted to raise something on page 58. So over to you.
Thank you. It could be 58. I wrote 55, so I'm. But anyway, wherever it is, somewhere in the report there is a note concerning the use of settings that aren't registered. and I can't find the pinpoint, and I apologise for that, but I wanted to ask what is being done to mitigate this risk if we are using settings that are operating without registration. Thank you.
Councillor Gebbie, you'd like to take that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Bennett, thank you very much for your question. What I would say in relation to operating without registration, it's something as a Cabinet we're very aware of, and it's something that we're very aware of in social services. We were in a position where we thought Welsh Government were going to prosecute personal members of staff, is what I want to say. So they were specifically targeting directors of social services and telling them that they were going to take them to court. The reality is, under the not-for-profit agenda, as much work as we're doing and as much as we're spending on that agenda and trying to resolve the issue, we haven't got enough placements for the children. We've talked about the demand on our service provision, and we've talked about the amount of placements that we need. Well, unfortunately, we can't get those registered quick enough, is what I want to say. We spoke earlier about opening Meadows View. We know that we're already in discussions with Welsh Government to get our registration through as quickly as possible. However, every member will be aware that sometimes there is a delay, and sometimes there are times when we're going to have to do something slightly differently in order that we meet the registration requirements. But it's something that we are doing. We are working on it. Really, you know, when I think about it's £4,700 for that's the average cost of a young person in a placement per week. Actually, if we've got our own facilities, that will reduce our costs significantly. So when we talk about the overspend in social services, that's going to help us immensely.
Thanks, Deputy Leader. Mark Shepherd, please.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think thanks to lobbying through the WLGA, and I know the League has been involved in this, that position about prosecution of directors and heads of children's service, I think is an improving one. I think it was CIW, this Care Inspector of Wales, who intended taking directors potentially to court in certain circumstances. I think the intervention that has been made with ministers has meant that they've stepped away from that a little bit, is the latest position, which is obviously sensible for the reasons that Councillor Gavy's described. I don't think it's anyone's preferred option to have unregulated settings, but frankly, our other statutory responsibilities mean that we sometimes have to find a placement at short notice, and there's very little choice, and I think that's been explained very well.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Bennett, you contend?
Yes, thank you, Chair. But just a supplementary, though, if I may. Is this now on the corporate risk register, or does it end up on a departmental risk register?
Okay, thank you, Mark.
It'll certainly be on the Directorate risk register, and there are broader risks relating to children's services on the corporate risk register, but I think it may be one of those evolving things that if it continues to be something that we need to focus on, we may need to change the narrative as we do, and we refresh regularly within the corporate risks as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Councillor Gebbie?
Yeah, just to reassure members, I suppose, we see all these figures at least once a fortnight in our gold meeting in relation to social services and the demands that we're facing.
Thank you for those assurances. Councillor David?
In our meetings with ministers and indeed with the Chief Inspector at CIW, we've also made the point about the need for CIW to act swiftly in the registration process. So as the Deputy Leader has described, we're very, very excited that the brand new state-of-the-art facility for children and young people will be handed over, hopefully in the coming weeks. That doesn't mean that we will be able to place children and young people there straight away. We will have to make sure that that setting is registered, and that does take time, and we're very clear with the Inspectorate, whilst we want that registration, of course, to be rigorous, it also needs to be undertaken very quickly. And because of the pressures within the market, because there is a market for accommodation for children and adults in Wales, just as there is across the UK, the Welsh Government's commitment to end the provision of residential care to children by the private sector does mean that some of those providers are obviously making decisions now about their provision in Wales, and it means that there's less provision overall available in the market. So it means that we'll need to continue to develop more either in-house provision or not-for-profit provision. So there is indeed a possibility there around using some not-for-profit provision, because that isn't always in-house provision, but we will have to continue to expand our in-house provision, and indeed our pop-up that we created in the last 2 years that was successfully registered and it is currently open and supporting a young person. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davies. Jackie?
Just to add really to the comment, so when our new provision is open, it will provide emergency provision as well as a short-term assessment beds, which will enable us to work with that individual child and, and be very clear about the long-term placement needs in terms of that. But in addition, because of the eliminating profit monies that we have secured from Welsh Government, we are commissioning a placement support team, which will include a clinical psychologist employed through the Health Board. And what that team will do really is support all our current placements, work with foster carers and our residential homes that will actually look to prevent any sort of placement breakdowns really, or the need for emergency placements moving forward really. So so they're in addition to some of the comments that we've made, so that's some of the things that we will be doing soon.
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor Gebbie?
Yeah, just one quick further contribution. The leader made reference to our pop-up. Our pop-up was supposed to be for an emergency provision only while we sorted something out, something that was more appropriate for this young person. The young person has stayed in our emergency provision now for nearly 2 years. And that just shows you and evidences the demand on residential placements for our young people. And I just thought that was worth noting. Thanks very much, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Gebbie. Just one from me, if I may. Page, whatever it is, 65, I think, on the smarter use of resources, wellbeing objective 3, with regards to implementing the planned budget reductions identified in the MTFS. The next steps are to receive and consider the draft recommendations from the independent review and develop an action plan. What are the timescales surrounding this? Caris?
The timescales on this is we have had an independent review completed. It's just in, and the intention was to take that to the next meeting of the Budget Research and Evaluation Panel.
That's great. Thank you very much, Caris. Moving now to page 72 and Councillor Griffiths with the question on housing and homelessness.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think at the beginning of today's meeting, we heard about an underspend, I think, in this area. And here we have both an underspend and underperformance. And we also recognise in here a very likely exponential increase in the need for this over time. I just wondered whether we had sufficient plans in place and whether we could have visibility of those plans for this area, which is definitely going to become more challenging over the next 18 months.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. And the Mayor's Fund is going up quite a lot today after Councillor Good's phone is going off and all this use of the word of the day.
I thought I'd just slip that in, Chair.
But I'll bring in Councillor Good now and hopefully his phone doesn't go off at the same time.
Well, yes, I'm trying, and I'll try not to say exponentially too many times. There we are. It's for a good cause, isn't it? Thank you for the question, Councillor Griffiths. Yeah, I mean, so we have the homelessness and housing strategy coming to, so it's gone through Cabinet last week, and we will be having the engagement on that going forward. So I believe there are plans to bring it to scrutiny in coming weeks, as well as engaging individually with groups and councillors on that, as well as the public consultation. So there is currently that plan out there for you to have a look at. I very much welcome all your comments and all your views, because I think, as we all know, we have to look for new solutions and new ways of looking at housing and homelessness, because you know, simply carrying on in the current way of working, I don't think will be sufficient. There are no easy answers to the housing and homelessness crisis, but it's something we do need to do, and we do need to be thinking outside the box. So I look forward to any and all suggestions that can help us with that.
Thank you, Councillor Good, and I'm reliably informed that it will be going before Scrutiny Committee 3 in September. So hopefully our colleagues will be able to scrutinise that in detail. Would you like to add anything, Councillor Griffiths?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. We now have a question from Councillor Williams on empty properties, page 75.
Thanks very much. I had a couple of questions on empty properties. It says in the report that only one has been brought back into use in the last year. I've got a number of empty properties in my ward, and I'm sure lots of others have as well. And I've been referring some of these empty properties for 4+ years, and yet there's been no movement at all. I think sometimes we're a bit lenient on some of these house owners, because I've been told over the 4 years, oh, they will be starting soon, they will be starting soon. So I wondered what we can do to add additional pressure and make sure that these properties are coming back into use. And in addition to that, with regards to those properties that have been vacant for more than 6 months, I've had a few queries coming through from residents who've taken on such a property. And if you look at our DFGs, for example, and we know we've got 300 and odd days to complete a DFG at the moment, and I'm assuming a lot of that is to do with the fact that we need to get construction workers, we need to get contractors to carry out the works, which it takes a long time. Well, that will be the same for residents who want to carry out works to these empty properties. Some of them are in such disrepair that they have to live elsewhere, and yet they're being charged council tax on both properties. I think they've got a little bit of leeway, but not enough to get those houses up to scratch within the 6 months. So I wondered what support could be out there for those residents as well, please.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Martin Morgans is joining us. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, Chair, for the purpose of the recording. My name is Martin Morgans, Head of Partnerships, and thank you, Councillor Williams, in terms of the question referred to. So in terms of the single entity for PAM 45, that's actually an interesting empty property indicator that Welsh Government issue. This is about where you convert a single dwelling to create an additional one. So you take a 2-storey house, as an example, and you convert that into have an additional property upstairs. So that's the rationale around that indicator itself. So it's not specifically about empty properties bringing an additional living dwelling back into use, which is really difficult for us to actually sort of support in terms of that. We do offer grants, etc. But as you're aware, the sort of legislation around rental, etc., with the local housing allowance is a differential from that perspective. If you look at the private rent versus local housing allowance, it's fundamentally much higher than every tenancy or tenure from single bed right up to 5 beds, which is something we're working with Welsh Government around in terms of making a differential. So that's specifically PAM 45. In terms of the real empty property strategy, that's PSR 004, and you see we're on amber at 5.77%. So we've got a working group, we've got a part-time officer that works with shared regulatory services that supports us with our empty property strategy, and our focus is primarily on the top 20 long-term voids. And as you can see in the narrative, we've had some significant movement around that, with 5 properties in the top 20 being occupied, 3 of them being sold, 1 of them is currently under renovation, 2 properties on the market, and 2 properties are pending probate. So we're working extensively on the top 20 because they are the worst case sort of properties throughout the borough. But also there's other cases, so that sort of offers us a caseload where we're engaging with. And the strategy is focused around working with owners of properties rather than going straight for the statutory intervention piece, because we've got to demonstrate we've done everything, exhausted every avenue in terms of support, etc., before we can take that to a sort of legislative process. So it's a real tough task, but it's a one we've seen some real gainage in terms of some of the returns from empty properties. In terms of support, councillors, we have a number of grants, etc. I can't speak specifically on council tax, but if it was an unfurnished property, then there's a discount there for that 6-month period. But we recently released our sort of scheme in terms of where the property's been empty for over a year unfurnished. There's financial support available. This managed by RTC, Rhondda Cynon Taff, on an all Wales basis. So that's a scheme, and we advertise all those schemes, etc. on our website. I'm happy to forward you on the details in terms of that availability, in terms of the support we can offer owners of empty properties. But we are, if they want to contact the team, we are happy and willing to engage with them and show them the avenues in terms of what support's available and what they can do in terms of that.
Thank you very much, Martin. Councillor David, Leader.
Thank you, Chair. And of those top 20 properties, if we can use that term, 6 of those properties are subject to enforcement notices. So we are taking enforcement action, but that is very much the last resort for us. The law requires it to be the last resort. Also, certainly in terms of my mailbag, and probably for other members as well, we've introduced the council tax premium on empty homes. I think that has undoubtedly had an impact. And then, as the head of service has described, of course, we do have a range of different grants and loans available. And only this year we approved an SLA with Rhondda Cynon Taff to provide grants on our behalf, Welsh Government grants, and those grants will be up to £25,000. So there's support there, as well as action against those owners that do not bring their properties back into use. But it does take time. But in the first instance, we would want to work with the owners, and we have a duty to try and work with the owners to support them in bringing the property back into use. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor David. Councillor Griffiths, you content with those comprehensive replies?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed. I think you're back on, Councillor Griffiths, with community asset transfers, page 85.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I'm thinking specifically here about smaller asset transfers to community councils as potentially a specific area where we can accelerate something without necessarily all of the normal bureaucracy that goes together with a community asset transfer on 2 bases. One, for small plots of land which are not necessarily large buildings or anything like that, and also where we are delegating into community councils which are statutory bodies, and so that they have a persistence about them. So I wonder whether there's something that we can do to accelerate that type of community asset transfer. And I refer back to some of the other comments that have been made around giving some of the responsibilities back into the community, and I think this is one way that we may be able to do that, to give the community more ownership of their area, and also helping the well-being of providing things like green spaces. So really, I think we should be trying to accelerate the transfer of green spaces, and I wonder whether there's a fast-track approach that we could use for community councils.
Thank you very much. Janine Nightingale, our Corporate Director for Communities, will answer this one. Janine.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Griffiths. It's a very good question, actually, and something that I think we would be happy to look at further. We're having a session tomorrow on the Communities Directorate itself, and for sure we do need to look at the target operating model and looking at new ways of working within the Directorate if we are to continue delivering those quality public services going forward. So absolutely, let's take a look at this, because I was having conversations with a couple of other councillors actually who said maybe community councils should be taking the lead and should be doing more, including the open spaces that you described. So yeah, really happy to look at that. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Janine. Councillor Griffiths, you content?
Yes, and if you need a fast track experiment for this, in Bracklow, we certainly have some areas which we'd like to think about an asset transfer, and we'd be very happy to be the first trial of a fast process.
Thank you very much. Councillor Granville did have his hand up, and then he's put it down again.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, we were going down the route of a transfer, but when we, I don't want to divulge too much in this meeting, but when we had the costings per year of that, what it would cost to maintain it, community councils have to be very aware of what money is going out of their pocket and what's coming in. It's not like a county borough where you can move here and move there. You've got a certain amount that's coming in. We've got £150,000 in Canary. You know, we're doing more than what we should be doing now. So that's all I'm saying to Simon is, you know, you've got to be very careful of how you do with the money. It's only there once.
Thank you, Councillor Granville. We'll now move up to Councillor Bennett, page 86 on startup businesses.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, DCO 18.8 talks about business startups, and it's good to see the significant rise reported at 770. But I note it's a provisional figure at present and it's dependent on national data. So my question is this predicted increase as a direct result of BCBC intervention, or are other things happening outside of our control? Just be interested in having a little more detail around this success.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bennett. Would like to take that? Janine?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bennett. Yeah, we've had quite a lot of success actually in this arena, something we're really proud of. We do an awful lot of work, BCBC themselves. We don't do this alone, of course. There's quite a lot of number of partners that are involved, the third sector. We have partners with Welsh Government, the CCR, and of course, predominantly Economic Development Department in here, BCBC, and employability. And I think it's a culmination of all those people working together. We do offer some grant support, but more's the point, I think what it's really, really instrumental is giving smart business advice. And people sometimes just need a helping hand to get them off the ladder, get them started. So that's something that we be providing. But I can't honestly say that we can take all of the praise here. I think it really is a very important joint effort for all key stakeholders to be improving the amount of business startups we have in the borough. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor David would like to come in as well.
Thank you, Chair. And indeed, the most credit goes to those entrepreneurs that are creating businesses in the county borough, and it's with all the challenges we're facing with the loss of some big employers, that's really heartening to see. What we can do, though, is we can identify, and perhaps it would be useful to do that, Janine and Councillor Farr, is identify, because we've got that information about the number of those startups that have directly benefited, either from advice, quite often from small startup grants, and I know the small startup grants can make all the difference in some of our new businesses. So we've got that information and we can look at including that, because some of the businesses we won't have any contact with at all, and they've gone on and set up and they've been really successful, but a lot have come to us. And Councillor Farr indeed opened a fair we had just last week for businesses to come in and have that face-to-face advice, not just from the economic development team, because that's a small team, but from other departments and teams within the council, whether it's the council tax team or the regeneration team, to talk to them about the help that's available, and having other partners there like the Development Bank for Wales and Welsh Government, because quite often we will signpost businesses to those other agencies that are there to help. So we'll try and quantify that if members would find that helpful going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor David. Councillor Farr, please.
Thank you, Chair. It looks like the leader read all my mind from the things I was going to say. Yes, we do have the data that we can collect and send out to members. I can say in the past 12 months, we've opened up at least 15 new businesses in town, several in the market and some cafes around town. One of the businesses we opened up in the market is doing so well. They're moving to their own premises outside of the market now. Last week at the business fair, we've got a company called Siddery. Am I pronouncing that right, leader? Siddery? Is that the business in my state? Ciderise, which is an international company, and they were asking us last week that they've got lots of vacancies. How can we support them with filling those vacancies, and also how can we support them with training their staff? So really, really positive work. And obviously we've got the Shared Prosperity Fund as well, which can also help businesses to apply for fund and to expand. We did have some existing businesses attend again last week who were looking to expand, and we signposted them to our SSPF funding stall. Oh, and Cozy Corner, I forgot about that, which is due to open this Thursday. We've got 5 retail units that's going to be opening up. We're going to be keeping one of the unit as a pop-up unit to give new businesses just a try to see will their business succeed or not. So lots of opportunities out there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farr. We will now move on to page 101. I believe, Councillor Griffiths, you've got a comment on service capacity.
Thank you. Sorry, struggling to get off mute there. Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, my question here was around the red mark on, this is page 103, on the surplus capacity in primary schools. I'm glad to see that this indicating is actually going down, but I wondered whether, and I apologise, maybe this is one for the Education Scrutiny Committee, but whether we have some clear projections based on demographics going forward for the next 5 years to get a clearer idea whether this is a red indication that will naturally fix itself as demographics run through, or whether it's actually going to get worse because of demographic changes as bubbles of numbers of pupils come through the system.
Thank you very much, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Blundell would like to come in first, and then I'll bring in Lindsay Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and again, thank you, Councillor Griffiths, for the question. We do model this. Gaynor and our 21st Century School Modernisation team has been looks at these type of things from when we do our next round of 21st Century Schools. So we see where the pinch points are going to be, where we need to build new schools, where we need to develop bigger schools. So we do look at that. You will have noticed, obviously not yourself, but returning members will have seen that this is reversed. This has gone the other way now, because secondary schools used to have had more gap in that, and there used to be less places in primary schools. Now we're seeing that gradually come forwards as those children go into secondary schools. So we are modelling that. We are keeping an eye on it, just so we know where we need to increase classrooms or increase schools, build bigger schools, and obviously that all fits into our 21st Century School Modernisation team. So hopefully that's answered your question. I don't know if Lindsay wants to add any more onto that.
Thank you, Councillor Blundell. Lindsay.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Blundell. Absolutely, Councillor Griffiths, just to build on Councillor Blundell's answer there. First of all, the Welsh Government asks local authorities to work towards a 10% surplus. That gives some sort of room within the system to accommodate learners within the schools. The challenge we face, and again in line with all of the local authorities, is that there's certain pockets of the local authority where there are real challenges around school places. So although this provides a projection across all of our schools in the current position, obviously, as Councillor Blundell says, we work very closely with planners to make sure our projections are tailored and they're cognizant of growth in certain areas. It doesn't give the true indication in some areas, because as you'll be aware, some schools are experiencing quite significant capacity issues. But across the board, we are moving towards that 10% target, and we monitor it very closely.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Griffiths.
If I may have a linked follow-up, actually. I've talked to you principally about demographics, but the other impact here is obviously on immigration into and out of the area. And I wonder whether we've seen any impact of Brexit with people maybe from Europe returning home, or whether we see any other impacts on the quite high numbers of immigration into the UK at the moment, more generally. Is there any trend that we can see that is not demographic based, but is immigration based?
Thank you very much. Lindsay?
Thanks, Chair. Not significant, Councillor Griffiths, for Bridgend. The one thing we do experience, of course, is we are bordered by other local authorities, and we do see some migration from those local authorities into schools in the area, especially the ones that are on the border. So we see an uplift then. So the most recent example really would be Maesteg, and we see a significant number of learners that have come from Neath Talbot who come into Maesteg. Now Maesteg currently quite a large surplus position there, and obviously we welcome those learners into the school. But as far as outward coming into Bridgend is concerned from other countries, not significant.
Thanks. Councillor Griffiths, you contend?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's actually quite good to hear that immigration isn't actually causing us an issue here at the moment. So it's not a problem for us unless we class people coming from Merthyr as immigrants, I guess. But that would be pushing it a little bit. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Thanks very much. I have a question on sickness absence for schools, and the table on page 107 is alarming that 24,861.82 full-time equivalent days lost in schools. That's alarming that number is so high. I expected it to be quite high during COVID because obviously with the isolating and everything, but it seems to be going up, and the last quarter is substantially higher than the previous quarters. So my questions on this are that as we've touched on school budgets earlier on in this meeting, and schools are setting their budgets, and yet the last few years, because of the rise in sickness absence in schools, they're receiving additional clawbacks for sickness late in the day. I think this year they came through at May for last financial year, meaning that their closing balances are often tipped into the deficit when they were originally hoping to finish in a slight surplus. So I think that I've got concerns that the numbers we're using when we're clawing back these sums from schools are out of date now, given that we can see that there's a rise in sickness from the statistics in this report. So I wondered what we can do to work with schools to make sure they're not going to be hit with this alarming figure at the end. I think this year there was an additional, for example, for Coity Primary, 16,000 odd at the end of the year in May, when you're set to finish in a slight surplus. It then is alarming when you have that in May. But also, in addition, I understand that the sickness payment clawbacks to schools are based on pupil numbers rather than staff numbers. So a lot of schools are paying far more for sickness than they have than other schools who have far more staff in the school, so far more sickness rates, but less pupils. So I wondered what can be done to make it a fairer, more proportionate way of dealing with these clawbacks for schools, please.
Thanks very much. Lindsay Harvey, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think you raised really important points there, Councillor Williams. They came up in last term's school budget forum meeting. Yes, we are monitoring the sickness absence in schools very carefully. One, obviously, for the well-being of staff, but also for the cost of supply staff. That obviously is a challenge, and clearly we want those teachers and school staff in front of the learners. So there is something we're looking at very carefully. With regard to the other points, with regard to the money that comes to schools, it is weighted on staff numbers, and School Budget Forum have asked us to weight that differently. So that's an action that we have taken from the last meeting, and I'd be happy to provide an update as soon as our officers in Education and Family Support have discussed with finance officers before proposals go to the next School Budget Forum.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Councillor Gebby, please.
Just to pick up on one of Councillor Williams' points, actually, COVID sickness wasn't included in any of our sickness stats. Welsh Government wanted them all declared as not part of our usual sickness programme. So the increase in stats for sickness is just because people are really genuinely sick.
Thank you, Councillor Gebby. Councillor Williams, you contend?
Yes, I'll wait to hear. I'm sure we'll pick it up in our scrutiny meeting at a later date.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Hughes, I'm conscious of the fact that I might have missed you out. You wanted to raise a question on the recycling centre on page 90. Apologies for that. I inadvertently missed you out.
No problem, Chair, at all. Yeah, it's about the reuse centre in Maesteg. It's a valuable resource used for upcycling second-hand goods. The problem is with this centre, it's been closed longer than it's been open. It's subject to an agency agreement, I think, with a local charity. But because of the discussion that we've had with startup businesses, it would be an ideal opportunity, I think, for someone with the right skills and drive to take on this facility. I just wonder what the prospect is of getting this open again, because it is a really valuable source to the local community. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hughes. Janine?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hughes, and thank you, Chair. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Reuse is a key part of our strategy going forward. It's a key performance indicator for us, and not having that site open doesn't help in that regard. I know the team have been looking at a range of options. Of course, we've got a partnership agreement in place currently, but that is something that we are going to consider, Councillor Hughes, to get that site open, because I know the community have valued it. And especially when people bring items to the the CRC centre, and they have got a usable life still in them. You know, a key part of reuse is a key part of our strategy. So if you would let me go away and speak to the team, I might be able to come back at a later date of scrutiny and explain some of the options that we are exploring on that. But yes, we definitely would like to get that site reopened. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Janine. Councillor Hughes, are you content with that?
Yeah, I think that's good. If one of the options could be a startup business, I think that would be really good. Thanks.
Great. We'll make a note of that. Thank you, Councillor Hughes. I'll now call on Councillor Walter. I believe you wanted to raise issues on page 109 about dates and corporate dates. Yeah, targets.
I think I'm okay now, Chair. I've been listening to what people have been saying, so I'll not take up the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walter. And now we move to the corporate risk register. I know that Councillor Bennett has a question on this.
No, I don't have a question. Sorry, Chair.
Okay. I obviously dreamt about that.
Sorry, no, I did have a question. You're right. Sorry, I thought it was going to be something Councillor Griffiths picked up, so I let Councillor Griffiths go ahead.
Yeah, I thought it was one of you. Councillor Griffiths and Councillor Bennett are doing a sort of partnership tag team thing here. So I'll call on Councillor Griffiths then.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I got a couple of points, some of them trivial, some of them a bit bigger. Everything in this page, that's page 109 and 110, is all red. I know that's red because they've been escalated up to that level, but we do have a range of raw risk scores between 6 and 25. Some indication of redness, if you like, whether it's shades of red or actually adding some extra colours in you might be helpful, so that we can really pull out the ones that are top priority. The other one is possibly a little bit more serious, which is around dates, action plans, projects around these. I'm still not really getting a feeling from this particular risk report that I know exactly how we are trying to address these risks. So I don't know whether there's a link document or whether there are action plans which we can be sure are in place. But for looking at it just from this level, I can't be sure that we are actually dealing with these risks in an appropriate manner. So whether it's a reference to something else or another document. So that's the second point. Do you want to, should we do that second point first, and then I'll do the third one, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine, Councillor Griffiths. Just as a rider to that, I fully agree with you. For example, there's a point here about corporate safeguarding, and it says that work is being undertaken to develop a sustainable model for the service. And it mentions that the next review is July 2023, but there's no specific target about when it's going to be achieved. And that's something which you've reiterated on a number of different points there. So perhaps someone can pick that up for us, Caris maybe, or Mark?
I'm happy to come in, Chair. I think, first of all, on the colour coding, actually, I think anything that has a residual risk of 15 or more comes up onto the corporate risk assessment. So anything below that won't be showing on here, it will be on our directorate ones. So it might be a little bit leading to put all of these as red in the way that they are. We need to think about how we report in that. And I think the other issue which you've raised is another issue that's been brought up through the Governance and Audit Committee, actually, because the corporate risk assessment has recently been there. And we were asked to look again at exactly what you've asked for, Councillor Griffiths, which is more about proper benchmarking and with regards to targets, so that you can actually see whether or not things are changing in relation to this, and then hopefully that may impact on the residual risk score. So that is something we're looking at for the next time we bring the corporate risk assessment through the Governance and Audit Committee.
Thank you, Caris. Councillor Griffiths, back to you.
Thank you very much. No, that's answered my questions there. Thank you, Caris. The final one really was thinking about the what I would call the existential risks that we face, and obviously we had a significant outage earlier this week, last week, which was covered in the as a comment in the council meeting. I think we probably still underestimate the potential impact of a cyber attack, and I really would like us to focus very hard on how we can do better protection against that, because the impact is really quite significant to residents and also to ourselves as officers and council members. But that was probably a minimal impact. It could be much more serious than that. So I know that we're in straitened times, but I think from an IT perspective that we are still carrying a significant amount of risk, as every organisation in the UK or in fact the world does at the moment. And so I think this is an area where, as much as I hate to say this, we might have to spend a bit more money to actually protect ourselves, because we can't deliver services if we have no IT systems.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. And of course, we'll be discussing our forward work programme later today. And you previously mentioned our cybersecurity risk on previous occasions, which, it occurred some business continuity issues last week. But I'll bring in Caris now.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, the Governance and Audit Committee did actually look at cybersecurity at their last meeting as off the corporate risk assessment. I think the other thing I would stress, it was not a cyber attack last week. So we do need to be careful a little bit on terminology on this, but I appreciate it was a major IT outage, and obviously having got it back up and running, we'll look back now on what happened, why it happened, and whether or not there's any mitigating actions we need to take to ensure that we're not in the same position again.
Thank you, Caris. I sit on the Governance and Audit Committee, and I must have slept since then because I can't remember. But I'll bring in Martin now to add a few supplementary comments, because I know he's on screen.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on Caris and your comments, really, Councillor Griffiths. We're all at risk in terms of cyber, and the most important sort of prevention is the person that's operating the IT equipment. So, and with the advent of AI, it's going to be really challenging for us. We obviously follow some due diligence in terms of cyber. We COCO PSN accredit in terms of our network, so we have external penetration tests, both externally and internally, where they identify any sort of potential vulnerabilities, which we do that on an annual basis to safeguard our network. And our patch management through change management is really key in terms of keeping us safe. But everyone is at risk every day, and it's vigilance as both officers and members, whatever emails come through, because from a phishing attack via email, we have around about 450 phishing attacks that are prevented through our firewall services on a daily basis is one of the key criteria, but really concerning around AI. But it's something we need to take away in terms of as a management team, in terms of what we can do, albeit finances being aware as well. But you can put as much mitigation in. It's about everyone being conscious about their activities utilising ICT equipment.
Thank you very much, Martin. Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask the officer concerned, equipment? Are we up to date with all equipment in ICT regarding an attack, or Martin, or are we slacking in and got equipment there that's not quite up to doing the job? Or were you can tell me, yes, we have got stuff that's okay?
I can give you assurances all equipment is up to date in terms of the infrastructure runs the officers' applications, etc. is under warranty and is patch managed on a regular basis. We follow the suppliers sort of remediation in terms of patch management. That's key for us. Any sort of exploitive the security patch that's been released to us, we implement as soon as possible within good guidance through change control to ensure that patch itself doesn't cause issues relating to the implementation, albeit then in terms of end user devices such as our laptops, etc. That goes through a robust patch management sequence where you've seen multiple times where laptops have to be restarted, etc. And I do ask all members and officers to, when you see our patch updates, to apply where possible, rather than them be forced through, so we don't have that reboot. But yes, in terms of our patch management, we're quite robust, and that's one of the key things that we put forward together in terms of mitigation around cyber.
Thank you very much. Councillor Granville.
Just to thank Martin for that answer.
Thank you very much. Councillor Griffiths.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin. That actually does give us some quite strong reassurances, I think. But I'd like to take up your point earlier, Chair, which was around the business continuity planning. And I think that's the area where we may need to focus a little bit more. And I know we've got cyber in the forward work plan, but I don't think we've got business continuity on it, if I remember rightly. So there may be an area where we need to focus in the future.
Yeah, quite right, and we can discuss that further later on today's agenda when we discuss our forward work programme. Are there any other comments on this report, item 5, Q4 performance report? Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, just a comment on page 139, Alex. I just want to check they haven't jumped the gun.
139 is the next report, Councillor.
Okay.
So yeah, we can just hold off on that for now and just focus on the performance report. It's similar, isn't it? Because the next one's the self-assessment report. But unless there are any further questions on the corporate performance report, I'd just like to thank all of the invitees for attending. If you're not required for any further item, you may leave the meeting, and thank you very much for all of your contributions today.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you. Just wait for officers and others to leave the meeting before we move on. Okay, members, we move now to item 6, the corporate self-assessment 22-23, and I'll now ask Alex Rowling to introduce the report.
Hello, Alex Rowling, Corporate Policy and Performance Manager, and I'm introducing the self-assessment report, the corporate self-assessment report for 2022-23. You've seen some of this before, so the approach to self-assessment went to CMB in March this year and to yourselves at your last meeting. In self-assessment, we're required by Welsh Government to demonstrate that we're doing 3 main things: performing well and improving outcomes, using our resources well, using the 7 types of use of resources in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and using proper governance. Because we've now woven most of the self-assessment process into our existing performance management processes, normal Q4 performance dashboards are closely reflected in the self-assessment draft report you have in front of you. So there's a really clear link, as you've already said, between the previous item and this one. Directorate DMTs have then used their performance dashboards to develop a directorate self-assessment, and the performance team have pulled these together into a single report. This was discussed and moderated at a CMB Heads of Service meeting in June, and then discussed by Corporate Performance Assessment earlier in July. We've come to our judgments on performance on each wellbeing objective in a way that is as objective as possible, but because we're balancing lots of different elements, many of them self-subjective judgments, there is inevitably some subjectivity in there. The judgments then are a balance of PI achievement, commitment achievement, broader direction of travel on continuous improvement, views of regulators, and our findings from consultation, involvement and engagement. We're obviously also judging ourselves against whether we feel we've improved, stayed the same, or got worse since last year's report. As this is the last year of this corporate plan period, the report will inevitably change quite significantly next year. But for this second year of self-assessment, we've kept to largely the same approach and kept the format of the report very similar to last year's. So then the judgments for the performance section of the report are all the same as last year's. So on wellbeing objective 2, that's a judgment of good. On wellbeing, judgment of good. On wellbeing objective 2, a judgment of adequate or amber. And on wellbeing objective 3, a judgment of good or yellow. The section on governance is largely covered by the annual governance statement, which will be going to GAC later in the summer, Governance and Audit Committee, sorry, and our judgment on this section is that governance is good. So I'll say a bit more on the second section on use of resources. The process we've gone through on use of resources is slightly different to last year. Heads of service or managers completed the 7 use of resources templates. They used the same range of internal and external evidence as we used last year. They've built on and reflected on last year's judgments using the key lines of inquiry or prompt questions we developed last year using the 5 principles in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. These have then been through Heads of Service CMB Challenge and then CPA Challenge in June. So we've taken all that, we've pulled everything together into 7 separate judgments and a single summary judgment exactly like last year. And again, we've said that as per last year, day-to-day management of resources is good, that there are clear and sensible processes, working models and relationships. But again, we've given ourselves an overall judgment of adequate. So we've said that clear improvements have been made and are being made, but practical progress, so far hasn't been enough to take us to a good rating. And obviously it doesn't help that we only published our last self-assessment in November, so you're only really talking about 7 or 8 months since then. Again, we've said the main things to focus on are around vacancies and capacity issues, both in corporate teams and the senior managers in directorates who work alongside them. And then I just wanted to really quickly mention the main changes we're making for this year for the report as a whole are publishing year-end performance information alongside self-assessment. So exactly like today, people are able to make the link between those 2 things. Including case studies in the self-assessment to highlight some areas of positive progress or good practice, and doing a formal consultation on the document over the summer, as well as more in-depth engagement and involvement with groups like Public Services Board, Youth Council, Town and Community Council Forum, and others. I think it's probably also worth a really quick mention that we're probably a good couple of months ahead of last year. So, you know, where we do want to make changes, I think we've got a bit more time than we did have this time last year.
Thank you very much, Alex, for that overview. From my perspective, an excellent report. I know there are a number of different questions. The only thing that I would question is on page 113, our assessment of wellbeing objective 2, and that is on ensuring that people are healthy and resilient. Is that communities are healthy and resilient? I believe that's the case. Of course, earlier on, we discussed performance of this, and I think 88-point-something% was classed as amber. Now, that's obviously below our target by a certain percentage. Is it by 10%? Is it amber? So therefore, it's not really, in my view, adequate. If you don't meet your target, then it's sort of kind of inadequate. So that's, I don't know, slightly concerning. And I previously mentioned this, and I know it's a Welsh Government instruction to ensure that local authorities self-assess. But as you mentioned already, it's kind of subjective, isn't it? It's kind of marking your own homework to a certain extent. So that was the only query that I had, was about wellbeing objective 2, but perhaps you can come in on that.
I think I'll be coming in on sort of a slightly broader point, really. I suppose there has been an increase in the number of amber commitments and indicators this year, but I think on balance, we don't believe it's severe enough to take us down a judgment category. As you said, entire point of self-assessment is to judge ourselves on the broadest possible range of evidence. We need to make sure we do that. But then, just as an example, and we could do this on each wellbeing objective, but for wellbeing objective 2 for last year, the balance of PI and commitment, red, amber, yellow, green ratings would likely lead you to a good judgment. But but we scored that wellbeing objective adequate because of the regulator views and the broader situation we found ourselves in children's services. So it's just a really difficult balance, I suppose. You know, last year we could have been good, but we went adequate. This year, maybe it's the other way, maybe it's the same. It feels like a fair judgment, I think, to us, but I think, you know, that's an argument for members.
Well, that's useful clarity, Alex. But I just wanted to try and correlate it with what we received earlier in terms of the 88% being in the amber category rather than in a higher category. But I know Mark wants to come in now as well.
If I may, Chair, I think it's a really valid point, and one I expect this debate actually, because this is relatively new. I think part of the challenge for both Alex and I is the breadth, certainly in the old corporate plan, of each of the objectives. So what you find is that clearly, as you say, PIs and commitments are an important part of what we're judging, but it's much beyond that as well. It's also about, as Alex described, it's about the views of regulators, and regulators have come along and surprised us sometimes and said, oh, you think you're doing really well? We go, oh, do we? And I think it's also about the feedback we get as from the public and from others about the services we provide. If you try and create an overall balance in all those, I think the judgment is right. But I think I do get that it's counterintuitive. The other thing I'd say, Alex, is that the conversation we had as well about we also want to maintain our PIs and commitments to be challenging and stretching. So what I don't want is a culture where people start setting PIs that are really easy because they think, well, that'll be okay because I can then self-assess myself as good, etc. So it's trying to create a culture that is honest and open and challenging. And I think something you said to me, Alex, was about maybe in this fora, we probably going to have to expect more ambers and reds as well, because you can't have it both ways. We can either set really easy targets and say to you, this is wonderful, we've got greens across the board, we're good. Or we genuinely try and drive forward the organisation by setting challenging and stretching targets. But that does mean, inevitably, that you won't always meet them. So I think I agree with Alex. We've spent ages going through this and debating whether it should be good or adequate. I think it is about right. I don't think we have moved significantly since last year when we did the judgment, which was only 7 or 8 months ago. But I think it's the breadth of those old objectives that are the problem, potentially moving forward, Alex, with a larger number of wellbeing objectives. It might be easier to target it and say, oh, actually, that one's not adequate at all. I get that. So at the moment, we're trying to judge children's services together with a whole range of other services that contribute to that objective, which probably are in a much better state.
Sure. And from my perspective, Mark, I think it's really encouraging for you to say that you want the organisation to strive to be better all the time. That's the kind of way in which I've been foreseeing performance management going forward. And I jump on my hobby horse again about objectives and key results. But it's about it not being a tick box exercise. Oh, I've achieved that target, we'll move on and focus on something else. It's about achieving the target and then setting a new one, and that the performance indicators can then be an objective and key result going forward. And I know the organisation can move in that direction eventually, but it will take some time, won't it, to ensure that that's the case in such a large organisation in which we're operating. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mark. Councillor Granville, please. Mistakenly put your hand up? No problem at all. I know that there are a few members who would like to make some contributions, so I think Simon Griffiths, Councillor Griffiths, would like to come in on net zero, page 136.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just trying to get my camera on. Yeah, so a more general point here about the report is that I'm a little bit disappointed that there's just one paragraph on net zero on something of document of this importance as a corporate priority, top level corporate CEO level own priority. I would have expected a bit more detail around this and a little bit more emphasis on it in the overall report. So I'm just disappointed that we still don't seem to be taking it into our core thinking around our challenge about net zero, which is fast approaching now, 7 years away, and 7 years is not very long at all when you're talking about the types of changes that we need to meet net zero.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Anyone? Yeah, Councillor David.
Chair, thanks for that, and apologies if it doesn't seem as if it's getting the focus and attention it needs, because it certainly is from Cabinet CMB, and we'll certainly look to significantly strengthen that, because of course this is an ongoing process of evolution of the self-assessment, and certainly in future years we will strengthen that as much as we can. Just to reassure you that there's been a recent change to the way that we report to Cabinet. So every Cabinet report now has a specific section, doesn't it, Chief Executive, on how this contributes or doesn't contribute to net zero carbon, so that every big decision we make, we look at it through the lens of, is this contributing towards net zero carbon or not? Can it contribute? How can it contribute? And what difference is it making? That's early days though, so when we started with that new reporting format this summer, but we're hoping that will make a difference, and we look at other ways of strengthening net zero carbon as clearly a very important priority for us for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, the most important reason is we have to address the climate emergency, but also we see it as a way of delivering more effective use of resources in most cases, and potentially delivering some financial savings in the long term as well, because we know that if we are reducing our carbon footprint most of the time, we're also, even if it's not in the short term, certainly in the long term, we're actually saving money as well. Thanks, Chair, and thanks for flagging that, Councillor Griffiths. That is helpful.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Griffiths, are you content with that reply?
Yes, and I'd like to just welcome that change to our reporting. At that level, it does make a difference that every Cabinet report will now have those sections. So I really welcome that approach, and I hope that in future that this report itself can also expand on the section around net zero, and perhaps include a section which specifically references those reports, that new reporting format and the output of those from Cabinet meetings. So thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Alex would like to come in, I think.
Only a really quick one to say. I suppose this is a bit of a cautionary tale, isn't it? Be careful what you put in your corporate plan as your priorities. Obviously, our new corporate plan has got an entire wellbeing objective completely devoted to this issue. But the old corporate plan, it just wasn't really there. And we absolutely can supplement the report in the way that the Leader suggests. But I think we just weren't, we're talking about a plan made 5 years ago. I suppose we just weren't there, really.
Great, thank you, Alex. Mark?
I was going to make a very similar point, but also suggest, perhaps to pick up Councillor Griffiths' point, it's a useful one for a case study moving forward, because I think there's an awful lot going on. Perhaps we don't do a lot of things justice in a single paragraph. So I take the point, and I think maybe we can think about a case study on that moving forward.
Thank you, Mark. That's helpful. Councillor Granville? Councillor Granville's button's got a mind of its own, so yeah, okay, we'll move on now. And I understand that Councillor Hughes has got a question on Ballister Coast and empty properties.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's on page 139. There is a heading above the empty properties, which says valleys to coast. But actually, if you look into that paragraph, it says quite a lot about the council's digital platform. And in terms of presentation, it might be good to just rejig that a bit to highlight the good progress that's been made on that. But in terms of the empty properties and valleys to coast, we give a grant of £500,000 to see 35 properties being brought into use once again. I think what we do need is some further reporting on the progress that has been made to actually get these properties completed and where we are in that process. But it's part of a general principle, I think. We don't give that many grants out, but where we do, I think we have to ensure that the conditions that apply to the grants are fulfilled And some expectations that I would have on this particular grant is that all of the subsequent allocations that are made to people who are waiting on the council's waiting list, which I think is particularly important. So it's just as a pointer, really, Chair, that if we could have some more progress reporting on items like this, it would be very useful. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hughes. Mark, would you like to pick this up? Councillor Davis?
Just to agree, really. I mean, it's not so much a grant, it's our contribution towards a scheme, and clearly, therefore, we would be very interested on an ongoing basis in establishing how that money is used. Just to reassure Councillor Hughes and others, I mean, we have, in governance terms, we have a series of meetings with Valleys to Coast, including at a strategic level, and this will be prominent on the agenda to get that progress, and we're happy to report that back to members.
Great, thank you. Leader?
Yeah, points well made by Councillor Hughes, and we will get a report for members on the outcomes of this grant, because it was about obviously accelerating the process, but also bring in some of those properties that had particularly large backlogs of repairs required or adaptations because of the condition of those properties and possibly wouldn't have been brought back into use. So we'll get an update for members on the grant. Thank you for that.
Great, thank you very much both. Councillor Hughes, I assume you're content with that approach.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions on the self-assessment report? Councillor Granville? You have now, okay. I was going to ignore you then.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say on that subject, and I'm glad that this has been raised, can we just, when we're looking at the figures, can we find out the top line figure from Valleys to Coast on the allocations? Because I do believe with Valleys to Coast, they do internal themselves allocations. So I'm just wondering, are they giving us the figure of empty properties after that, or are they giving it before that, right? So if they're doing their own allocation, are we having a percentage of all the houses that are available to us or not? I think we need to go down that route. I can see the leader looking very perplexed there, but I think we need to probe that.
No, not perplexed at all. I assure you it comes to Granville, but I think what it would be of interest and of help to members is having more information about the voids. That's the term that's used that Valleys to Coast have. It's obviously our biggest registered social landlord in the county borough, and you're right, Councillor Granville. So there are two routes. Our other RSLs in the county borough only allocate to the Common Housing Register. Valleys to Coast do have their own application process in addition to the Common Housing Register. But in addition to that, as you identified, it's quite common for existing tenants of Valleys to Coast to want to change their property because, for example, their circumstances change. Their family may be of a different size and they want to downsize or upsize. My understanding is that the void figures would currently include that, but what would be helpful, I think, is obtaining some information for members about benchmarking with other RSLs, about the times that it takes for voids to be brought back into use. Although I would I would give the warning that sometimes you have to be careful about benchmarking comparisons because Valleys to Coast does have a much older housing stock than some of our other RSLs, indeed all our other RSLs in the county borough. I'm not in any way justifying slow and poor performance, and I'm not saying there is slow and poor performance by Valleys to Coast, but there can be reasons why it takes longer to bring some properties back into use. But we will get some more information to Councillor Granville on that, because I know it's not just of interest to Councillor Granville, I'm sure it's of interest to you, Chair, and to other members, because as the Cabinet Member for Housing described earlier, we do have a housing crisis, and we expect voids to be brought back into use as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. Just a supplementary on that. What I'm concerned about is that Valleys, of course, not cherry picking the best that they're having this money, and they put in their own people in it and not giving it out there to on the list, like, you know, from people with call, right? That's only my concern, and I'd love to have them here in a scrutiny meeting and really go deep dive into it.
I'm sure you didn't mean that against the people of Porthcawl, but I'll bring in Councillor David now.
Thank you, Councillor Granville. Thank you, Chair. Certainly, it's a requirement of the agreement that we have with Valleys Coast that at least once a year that they are invited to attend a overall scrutiny committee, and they are scrutinised by that committee. So if that hasn't taken place already, I'm sure it's something that can be looked at for the forward work programme, and that is in addition to Valleys to Coast also attending at least once a year a meeting of full council, and in addition to them also holding briefing sessions where all members are invited along and where some of these questions can be asked. Without having the detail in front of me, Mark, I'm almost certain that it was a requirement of the grant that that these properties were allocated to people on the Common Housing Register, because that was the purpose of giving the grant, is to help with the pressures that we have. But once again, we'll get that confirmed for members. Thank you, Chair.
That's great, and I'm reliably informed that they appeared before Scrutiny Committee 3 last September, so no doubt they'll be before in November this year. November this year, so that's good news. Okay, are there any other comments on this report? Can't see anyone indicating. So if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank the invitees, and you may, of course, stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you're no longer required, you may leave. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thanks very much. We'll try and rattle through these other reports now, members, so we won't take a break at the moment. We're almost at the end. But I will now invite our scrutiny officer, Jessica, to go through our conclusions and recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that we've had many questions and answers in today's session. So if I may take you back to the first report, which is the Budget Monitoring Report, Q1. At the start of the meeting, there was some discussion with regards to exponential, which has been a word that's obviously been a buzzword of today's session, particularly with there was some sort of graph that could be provided to represent the trend over the past number of years. In addition, there was some discussion about whether the scenario modelling can be brought in to represent. I think it was attributed to council tax in particular, but I think there may have been some other areas that the members may wish to consider whether they'd like to have that represented in upcoming reports. Similarly, as well, in terms of this appeared throughout the report, in terms of directorates trying to identify cost savings, whether there could be more sort of corporate overview of that rather than directorates having to identify those things. And of course, we have got a budget research and evaluation panel coming up as well with the committee. We'll be looking at things such as that. As well as what was discussed in terms of freezing recruitment, and members heard from the Chief and the Deputy Leader in terms of the fact that that was a real possibility, but gave some indication perhaps of the limitations at this time. Again, the issue of vacancies and workforce and recruitment has been a theme throughout today's meetings. It has in previous meetings as well as going back to the issue of savings and the matter of, in theory, cutting services and tough decisions having to be made. Moving through to specifically the Social Services Directorate, a question was asked with regards to the complexity of cases and the increase in cases through the front door. And Jackie Davis, Head of Adult Social Care, did start to give some examples of case studies, but perhaps if the committee would like further details and further case studies that she referred to, she indicated that she would be happy to provide those, and perhaps we can request those. Members also asked with regards to the blue badge scheme, so moving through to the Communities Directorate and the likely timescale for the consultation in that regard. The Corporate Director of Communities did give an indication that that was likely to be in the autumn at some time, indicating that resources are tied up at the moment with regards to the 20 mile an hour scheme. But she was happy to put a note out once that has been done. So perhaps we can ask if the committee would like for that information to be made available when it is. Moving through to education, of course, there was just some discussion with regards to the deficit positions that are now being predicted by many schools, as well as the schools that were in a significant surplus budget position, and whether that was the fluctuation in those figures. Members also had a fair amount of discussion with regards to home to school transport and the gold-plated service that is being operated, with the caveat from, I think, the leader and from the corporate director for education in terms of the eligibility criteria for eligible learners and the statutory service that is required in that regard. Members will recall, I think this committee made a recommendation at the previous meeting on 3rd of July in regards to an update as to when the home to school transport review would be made available from Welsh Government. And members here today that that's unlikely to now be August, which was the date that was previously provided. With members also making the recommendation, or noting within their recommendation on 3rd of July, that unfortunately any sort of change that service is unlikely to be looked at pending that review, and that was reiterated then by the Cabinet member today, who indicated his sort of reticence, I suppose, to roll that back if the review requires the authority to put back in services that perhaps we're already providing. Finally, moving through towards the end of the meeting, then there was a brief discussion with regards to reserves, and Caris gave the committee some information with regards to how some reserves have been unwound. And again, I think it was yourself, Chair, that mentioned that can be raised again in our upcoming BREP meeting. And then there was in relation to specifically with regards to COM 1 and 2, but I think generally in terms of the tracker, in terms of the committee recommended perhaps having some targets and timescales attributed to that, if the committee thinks that's a recommendation they'd like to make. But again, I think members did have some answers from officers today that those can be looked at in BREP, and I think officers were perhaps keen to incorporate those into future reports. So on that particular report, Chair, I'll pause and see if members have any comments or further recommendations, please.
Thank you, Jessica, for that summary. I'm constantly amazed on how you pull that together during the meeting. Are there any other conclusions and recommendations which members can highlight at present, or are you content to support Jessica's assessment of the recommendations? Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I rose a good point after Councillor Amanda Williams raised about the kitchens and about the different things, about working with farmers to source, if we can get potatoes, all the veg for the kitchens at a cheaper cost, working in partnership. I think that might be a way forward. Just to raise that, Chair, that's all.
Yeah, I think, Jess, you've recorded that somewhere in your notes, haven't you? But obviously it's just a summary which Jessica's written, and obviously the final conclusions and recommendations after which, after Jessica's been able to write them all up, will be more comprehensive than what we can summarise at this point. But point well made, Councillor Granville, thank you very much. Are there any other further contributions from members before we move on to the next report? No, so I think we can go on to the next report on performance. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, Councillor Cranville, I did have your point, and apologies, I didn't cover that in my summary. But no, you're quite right. We did have that in the budget discussion. So moving forward to the Q4 performance report. Initially, there was some discussion with regards to the reds, but generally is what we've focused on today, reds and ambers, and in relation to a challenge, an external challenge outside of the directorates. And Alex Rawlin has given an indication that there used to be challenge meetings, and the team are going to look and take those potentially into account over the next 6 months when in their planning discussions. There was some discussion with regards to consistency of reporting and an improvement in that data, as well as some discussions then regarding the comparison then between the different tables within the report. There was some discussion with regards to sickness absence. And there's some discussion specifically around the Communities Directorate, and latterly as well in terms of the Education Directorate. And members will note that the dashboards contain some information in terms of the breakdown in terms of the reasons for those absences, as well as the number of days lost. And there were some discussions in terms of what could or couldn't be achieved to support members further than the wellbeing offers that are already in place, as well as on the background of the previous report of the budget and the difficult budget position and availability of, I think there was discussion about physiotherapists and those kinds of things. Again, then moving through to the Social Services Directorate, there was some discussion with regards to the number of children on the child protection register. Some discussions around the implementation of the signs of safety model of practice following the CIW report. And there was some further discussion then as well about agency costs and a request for the cost of agency workers as compared to the equivalent cost of full-time staff. And it has been indicated that those agency costs are closely monitored, and a breakdown can be provided by directorate, so we can request that information for the committee. There was some discussion with regards to the number of care leavers in employment or education, and Jackie provided some detail to the committee in terms of the basic income pilot, with some initial data coming through, which is indicating that those in receipt of that basic income support, or rather the number in receipt of the basic income support, are less engaged than those who are not. And Cardiff University are commissioning a piece of work. And we understand from a previous meeting with Claire that a paper will be brought to the Cabinet Committee Corporate Parenting with regards feedback from that. And members will note when we come to the Forward Work Programme item that we've got an information report back to this committee from this committee's nominee, updating the committee on the corporate parenting, Cabinet Committee corporate parenting meetings. There was some discussion still in the Social Services Directorate in terms of placement sufficiency, and in terms of unregulated placements. Again, I just want to sort of reassure the committee that we've got the strategic commissioning plans coming to Subject Over and Scrutiny Committee 2 in September, where that item will be looked at in a bit more detail, as well as the Safeguard Annual Report, which I think is coming to SOC 2 later on in this year as well. There was some discussion, apologies I didn't touch on this in the budget report either, but with regards to housing and homelessness and the current underspend position. And then there was also some discussions with regards to empty properties, and there were some discussions around the PAM 45 and the council tax position in respect of unfurnished properties or unoccupied properties. Then there were some discussions in relation to the Communities Directorate in terms of CAT transfers and whether there was a simpler sort of fast track process for less risky possible transfers, and that was something that the Corporate Director indicated that they would be very happy to look into. And in fact, I think Corporate Director referred to the extraordinary SOC 3 meeting that's due to take place tomorrow, so perhaps that may be picked up there. Moving through then as well, there was some discussion with regards to business startups and the fact there was only a provisional figure featured within the dashboards. And there was some indication that that had actually been quite successful, and the leader indicated that perhaps they could identify or rather pull together a breakdown of those who have benefited directly from support, whether that be by advice or funding. And there was reference as well to a face-to-face fair that's recently taken place that perhaps we can ask if the committee would like for that information. I was moving back then, I think, to sickness absences. I'm just wondering what my note is here. Oh, it was in relation to, sickness absence and the cost of supply staff. Lindsay Harvey, the Corporate Director for Education, indicates they are monitoring that issue closely. I think there's some concern about the level of clawbacks and the possible rebalancing exercise to be undertaken in terms of whether that is balanced on staff members or pupil numbers. And he'd indicated that that was actually a recommendation coming out of the school budget forum. Again, he was happy to provide an update once that had been discussed with finance officers, but before the next school budget forum, so if the committee would like, we could request that update. Then we move through to the reuse shops, and I know latterly we had some discussions then about the net zero carbon agenda. And the leader I beg your pardon, the Corporate Director of Communities indicated that they might be able to come back to scrutiny with some options that are being considered at a later stage. And then finally, in terms of the performance report, there were some discussions with regards to either a cyber attack or certainly the issue of business continuity and the sort of up-to-date nature of equipment and infrastructure. And members hopefully had some reassurances from officers in that regard. But of course, I know there will be some further discussion with regards to that item once we come to the forward work programme. So that was everything I had for that item. Chair, if I can hand back to members for comments, please.
Thank you, Jessica, for that. Once again, a very comprehensive appraisal of what we've discussed. And I've got a hand up from Councillor Richard Member.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you indulge me. I did ask when we were looking at sickness absences, it would be more for clarification on each directorate if we could have the breakdown for each directorate. I can see like long-term, short-term, right? But it doesn't tell me where that is, right? And I've gone over the page and I've looked again. I can see the actual breakdown, right? But it doesn't tell me if it's an education, social services, or whatever directorate. It doesn't give me that kind of breakdown, and I'd just like to see that breakdown of each directorate to see how they're performing. Because, you know, I didn't say too much today, but where you've got a team of 3 or 4, and you've got one person going off on the sick, them 3 people have to pick up that tab, and it's hard going. But I'd just like to see, you know, what is going on in each directorate. Whether we can or not, I don't know, but I'd just like to see it, Chair.
If you refer to your pack, and just for an example, page 106 and 107, for example, that's the Education Directorate. It says additional sickness information by service area and then sickness absence by reason. Does that satisfy what you're looking for, or do you require further information than that? Because there's one for each directorate, so for Community, Social Services, Chief Exec and Education and Family Support. I believe that information is there, but if you require further information from any of the directorates, more than happy to ask for it, Richard.
Chair, this is not the right committee to ask for, and we haven't got a HR committee. You can't delve into things within directorates and ask specific questions. This is an open forum and you can't do that. So in light of that, perhaps, look, we leave it at that, and it needs to be taken to another place for that discussion to take place.
Yeah, we do. Well, we do have oversight of all employment and HR issues here, but of course, if there's anything of a sensitive nature, we wouldn't be able to deal with it in a public forum. So perhaps we can pick up any information that you'd like to receive with Kelly Watson, who's responsible for HR, out of this meeting. That's all right.
Thank you, Chair. But I'm just looking at long-term, short-term. What are we doing, like in education, right? What are education doing to get these people back in, back into the fold? That's all I'm looking at.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Just to monitor it, to see what the costings are to us as an authority.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we'll pick that up offline, Councillor Granville, and we'll ensure that we have the information we require. Okay. Are there any other contributions from members? Okay, so we go on to the next report on self-assessment, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was, so there were a couple of questions and queries in relation to this report. The first one was in relation to the correlation between the adequate, or specifically, I think it was yourself, Chair, raised in relation to wellbeing objective 2, the adequate assessment that had been assessed for that wellbeing objective, with regards to in the performance report having several missed targets, for example on reablement, and members heard that that there was potentially two ways in which that judgment could have gone, highlighting that there were quite a few greens and possibly some blues, which could have brought the assessment up. But in fact, they were obviously then the reds that had been referred to that brought that down. And on balance, I think it had been felt that adequate was fair. And the chief then also gave members some further information in terms of wanted to maintain that the KPIs to be challenging and stretching and have an honest, open and challenging culture, where we keep striving to ensure that the directorate keeps bettering itself, rather than just maintaining greens or blues statuses. Members asked as well in relation to the net zero priority for the authority and the sort of limited information contained within the report. And members here that it was sort of based on a previous corporate plan where now we have other objectives, as well as we've now got a new corporate report template which draws people's attention and officers' attention when they're drafting reports to Cabinet and to committees to consider the net zero or effect on net zero, if any. And members also asked with regards to the grant, with regards to Valley Coast and empty properties, and the leader indicated that they could provide an update for members on the outcome of that grant, indicating that it was about accelerating to deal with the backlog of repairs and adaptations required to bring some properties back into use. So we can request that information for the committee if they would like. And the leader also agreed to take offline some further queries with regards to voids the V2C have, and as well as some further information with regards to their application process and the Common Housing Register. So that's everything I had on that item, Chair. If I'd hand back to members for any further recommendations or requests, please.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I open the floor to members. I think that summarises it very nicely, and I don't have anything to add, but I'm happy to take any interventions from members. I can't see any, so thank you very much for taking us through that, Jessica. We now move to item 8 on our agenda, and that's the proposals for the joint overview and scrutiny arrangements following a transition to a single public services board for Cwm Taf Morgannwg, and I will ask Jessica to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update the committee on the proposed joint scrutiny arrangements and terms of reference for the Cwm Taf Morgannwg Public Services Board following the transition to a single public services board for Cwm Taf Morgannwg. The Cwm Taff Morgannwg Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee will comprise 5 elected members from each of the 3 local authorities, Overview and Scrutiny Committees, designated to scrutinise the work of the PSB as required by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 and based on the political balance of each of those committees as far as practical. The committee is therefore asked to nominate for the 2023-24 municipal year 5 members to the PSB Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee and 1 substitute member to attend when one of the core members are not available, based on the political balance of the committee as follows: 3 members from Labour, 2 members from the Bridgend County Independents made up of 1 ordinary member and 1 substitute, and 1 member from the Democratic Alliance. And I would just like to let members know that training has been arranged for members who are nominated to the PSB for the 5th September at 10 a.m, which will take place in person at a central location to be confirmed. Thank you. I'll just hand back to you, Chair, if I may, for nominations.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I'm conscious of the fact that I've been made aware that the Labour group aren't in a position to nominate today. So it's been agreed that they can make their nominations at our next meeting on the 4th of September. But I would just like members to be mindful of the fact that, of what Jessica said then, in that training will be in person at a central location the following day on the 5th of September. So please be aware of that when considering who's to represent the Public Services Board. I'll bring in Councillor Martin Hughes now. I'm conscious he's got his hand up. So, Martin.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, it's just to formally move that we defer to a meeting on the 4th of September.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. I've been made aware, though, by scrutiny by the scrutiny team that it would be, if possible, members from other groups who are content to nominate today, that they proceed, and that those groups who are not necessarily in a position to nominate today are able to defer. So perhaps I can go to Councillor Amanda Williams, the leader of Bridgend County Independents, to see whether she's in a position to nominate her members, and then we can take it from there. Councillor Williams.
Thanks very much. Yes, I'm in a position to move forward. I've spoken to Councillor Freya Bledsoe, who has been our representative on this committee. She would like to be in the position of the additional, not the normal member, the substitute member for this year going forward, due to other things she has to deal with this year. So it would be Councillor Freya Bledsoe for the substitute, and then myself for the other member, because Councillor Tim Thomas isn't in this meeting. So I wouldn't want to speak for him, as we have to be there in person. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I can speak on behalf of the Democratic Alliance Group, as Councillor Penhale Thomas is not with us today. I've endeavoured to get in touch with him to see whether he would like to be the member, but I haven't been able to do so. So on that basis, I will be the nominee from the Democratic Alliance Group. And then I understand that the Labour Group aren't in a position to do so. So following Councillor Hughes's motion to postpone the nominations from the Labour Group, is someone happy to second Councillor?
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Granville. I'm more than happy to second the nomination of Councillor Amanda Williams as the main member from the Bridgend County Independents, and second Councillor Freya Bledsoe's nomination as the substitute member. And I call on Councillor Williams.
And I'm happy to second your nomination.
Thank you very much. You read my mind. Many thanks. So therefore, we will pick up this agenda item again to obtain the nominees from the Labour Group on September the 4th. But as I said, please be mindful of the fact that training is the following day in person at 10 a.m. So bear that in mind when you're having your discussions in the intervening period. Thank you very much, Jessica, for that. We now move to item 9, our forward work programme, and I'll ask you to present that report as well.
Thank you, Chair. The Council's constitution requires the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee to develop and implement a forward work programme for the committee. Forward work programmes need to be manageable to maximise the effective use of the limited time and resources of scrutiny committees. It's not possible to include every topic proposed, as successful scrutiny is about looking at the right topic in the right way, and members need to be selective while also being able to demonstrate clear arguments for including or excluding topics. Within the report, there are criteria for topic selection to assist in maximising the effective use of time of scrutiny committees. Following the approval of the schedule of scrutiny committee meeting dates at the annual meeting of Council in May, the scheduling of standing statutory reports have been mapped to the appropriate meeting dates into a draft forward work programme. The subject overview and scrutiny committee forward work programmes will be reported to the next meeting of COSC following the conclusion of their first cycle of SOC meetings for oversight of the overall forward work programme. The committee considered and approved the draft forward work programme at its meeting on the 3rd of July 2023, subject to consideration of any potential topics that may be proposed following the scrutiny of the reports that were scheduled for the meeting today. In addition, the team are aware of some requests from members to bring forward the scheduling of reports on cybersecurity and the reconsideration of the redevelopment of Maesteg Town Hall. The forward work programme for COSC is therefore attached as Appendix A for the committee's consideration. The recommendations monitoring action sheet to track the outstanding responses to the committee's recommendations made at previous meetings in 22-23 is attached as Appendix B, and we would also invite members to note the responses to recommendations that were circulated last week. The recommendations monitoring action sheet to track the responses to the committee's recommendations made at its previous meeting is attached as Appendix C, and the tracker will be updated when responses are received and circulated. I'll hand back to you, Chair, for any questions or comments from members.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for taking us through that. Our next meeting, members, as I've just mentioned, is the 4th of September, and the report topics which we have in front of us, some of which are statutory, are the Director of Social Services Annual Report, our Scrutiny Annual Report, Scrutiny Methodology and Key Performance Indicators, and the Cabinet Committee Corporate Parenting Update. I think from what I can gather, and following previous discussion which emanated from Councillor Griffiths' suggestion that we consider cybersecurity, that may have been adapted somewhat into operational business continuity. So it's my recommendation, and I hope that members agree, is that we seek a report from Caris, who's our Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change, on the business continuity planning. Is that something which members would agree with? Councillor Walter?
Yes, I would support that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's building upon what Councillor Griffiths said about cybersecurity. So, Councillor Griffiths, are you content with that approach? Do you have a proposal of what you'd like to?
No, I just want to say fully agree. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much to you both. So therefore, we'll request that, if that's okay, Jessica Merrill, from Caris for our for 4th of September, if they're able to pull that together by then. Then, of course, our next meeting is Monday, the 23rd of October. And we've got budget monitoring and the performance management improvement plan monitoring again. We don't have a substantive item there as yet. It has been mooted that we may want to discuss the progress on the redevelopment of Maesteg Town Hall and whether that is going to be experience further delays, or it may experience further cost implications. I don't know whether you'd like to consider that or a separate topic, Councillor Walter.
I'm wondering, Chair, if it doesn't fall more appropriately under SOC 3.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to delegate that to SOC 3 as it covers communities. I think that's an important intervention. More than happy for individual committees to take on their operational workload and for us to focus on more corporate-wide issues.
Thanks, Chair.
But it was on our long-term forward work programme works to be scheduled. So perhaps we can move that off hours and put it and suggest it to Councillor Paul Davis. Of course, we don't want to instruct him, but perhaps suggest it to him as a topic for a future agenda for SOC 3. We don't necessarily have anything else which is substantive, do we, on our forward work programme other than... Okay, Jessica's saying that we may want to move the scrutiny annual report just for time management purposes. We can therefore move that to the October meeting. But perhaps in the intervening period, members can think about exactly what they'd like to look at in more detail and maybe associate that with some of the corporate risks which have been identified on the corporate risk register and bearing in mind our corporate plan, which allies itself to 7 overall objectives and, of course, the 3 wellbeing objectives which we've been discussing today. But, of course, we can discuss our forward work programme, I suppose, at our next meeting. We've got the main substantive item which we're asking for, which is on business continuity planning, and we can look at our agenda items for October after that. Is everyone content with that approach?
Yeah.
Good. I'll take that as agreement that we proceed on that basis. So we move to item 10, and that's urgent items. There are no urgent items of business in respect of which notice is being given in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 4 of the Council Procedure Rules. And I'd like to thank members for all their contributions, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Alex. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, everybody.